All year, there has been a glaring hole in the New York Mets lineup when it comes to their DH, and it is about time that they do something to fill it. For a Friday Farm Report today, I'm going to tell you why Mark Vientos should be promoted to be the team's primary DH right now.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. And we also just wrote an article that went up on Thursday based on yesterday's podcast talking about Taijuan Walker's splitter. I encourage you to check that out. I'll leave it in the description of the episode because there was some updated stats after Walker's great outing against the Astros that really just continued to boost my argument about why Walker's splitter has turned him into the most consistent starter on the Mets this year. Now I'm writing another article about Mark Vientos and why it is time for the Mets to promote the kid right now and have him be the primary DH. And we've talked about this dating back to the offseason, if you've been listening to this show. I have been on the Mark Vientos bandwagon for a really long time. I campaigned in the offseason for him to get an opportunity to win the job in spring training. And as I've talked about throughout the year, obviously that would not have been the right call. Now, another thing I did say when it was clear he was going to AAA is you wanted to see probably about 250 more plate appearances of Mark Vientos in AAA to prove he's ready to go. And I think when you're talking about promoting a top prospect in general, a good sweet spot for the amount of at-bats or plate appearances you want to see them have at the lower levels is around 1,500 to 2,000. Right now, Mark Vientos, for his minor league career, is sitting at 1,510 plate appearances. So he's just kind of crossed that threshold. He's getting to a point where he would warrant a promotion based on his time spent in the minors and based on the production we have seen, particularly since 2021. Because since then, since we got back to minor league baseball after the COVID shutdown, Mark Vientos has 37 home runs and 134 games played. The only other prospect in the Mets system with more home runs is Francisco Alvarez, because he's a madman who we're going to continue to talk about, of course, on this show, because he's pushing for a promotion himself, at least to AAA, and he's got 18 home runs on the season and 40 since the start of 2021, because he had 22 last year. That's in 148 games played for Alvarez. These are your two guys that can leave the yard at any time, and the Mets just don't have a lot of home run juice in their lineup right now. It's Pete Alonso, it's Francisco Lindor, and every once in a while you get a Canna. Every once in a while you get Escobar, maybe Starling Marte. They'll chip in a homer here and there. McNeil has some, but really there's two home run hitters on this team right now. Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor, the two guys that have been carrying the run producing this season. This is an opportunity to get another guy in your lineup that can fill that void. And I'm done with JD Davis out there. You know, you could go back, listen to Curious Case of JD Davis. I broke down the numbers. I'm done with what the expected stuff is telling us. That on the field, he's doing nothing. He's not producing. That's just the reality. Dom Smith got demoted for a reason. As much as I'd like to see him out there and see him get a chance and see it all come together as a Met, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. And you're in a window right now where you're trying to win. So Mark Vientos is someone that can come in right now and potentially give you a huge jolt. I wanted to compare a little bit Pete Alonso to Francisco Alvarez, Pete Alonso to Mark Vientos, that is, when it comes to their AAA numbers. Because as I did a past podcast talking about how Vientos could be the next Alonso, very similar profiles in their ability to leave the yard and also just kind of the roles that they serve, right? Right-handed power bats that I think really when you're talking about Vientos's future position in the big leagues, first base, maybe the only place where he could ever really be above average, solid contributor with a lot of hard work like we've seen from Alonso. This is the type of box you're talking about, but with the DH, you can have both of these guys. So Here's what Alonso did in AAA to close out the season in 2018. Had a lot of games played in the minors that year, spent half the year in AA, half the year in AAA, and then obviously began the 2019 season on the opening day roster in the starting lineup. Played 67 games in AAA to close out 2018. Hit 260, 355 on base, 585 slugging. Mark Vientos has played 64 games in AAA, dating back to his games spent last year and combining it with this year. He's hitting 252 at the level, 356 on base, 500 slugging. So his on base percentage is 1 point better than what Pete Alonso did. His average is fairly close. The only difference is the power production. Alonso, a lot better at getting extra base hits outside of the home run. 19 doubles and a triple in his games in AAA. For Vientos, only has 9 doubles and 1 triple, so 10 less extra base hits when it comes to the doubles and triples. Also 6 less home runs. Alonso had 21, Vientos 15. So Pete Alonso was a more accomplished hitter, a more complete hitter at the time of his promotion, and he's only gotten better and better. Vientos, not quite that. I'm not saying he's going to be the next Alonso, but if he is a 70% facsimile when it comes to power production, and you're talking about what you're getting right now out of guys like Eduardo Escobar, JD Davis, Dom Smith, even talk about earlier in the year with Robinson Cano, or even Nick Plummer, who got a little bit of run there too. What Vientos can bring from a power production standpoint is just a notch above everyone they have been running out there. And then you look at the strikeouts and the walks, and Mark Vientos strikes out a lot, okay? In AAA, looking at last year and this year combined, strikeout rate of 32.3%. Pete Alonso was at 25.9%. So Alonso was not striking out as much as Vientos is. But Vientos is walking a little bit more, 13.4% compared to Alonso at 11%. So as long as he's drawing his walks and hitting his home runs, you'll take the fact that there's a lot of swing and miss in his game. He's very much a 3 true outcomes type hitter. But you look at what he's done this season, and the first month, you just want to throw it out because Mark Vientos was terrible in that first month. Since the calendar turned to May, he's hitting 287, 383 on base, 566 slugging percentage, 11 home runs, and 153 plate appearances. That breaks down to a home run about every 14 at bats, 13.9. So, or not at bats, actually, plate appearances. That makes it even more impressive. You look at Pete Alonso for the season, and that's obviously not throwing out a bad month like we just did on Vientos' stats. For this season, Pete Alonso is homering once every 14.5 plate appearances. So again, that just shows you the power we're talking about. And the difference between Mark Vientos and everybody else we're talking about here when it comes to DH options is he can run into that 3-run homer that wins you a game. And the Mets just don't have enough of that right now. So I think because of where the roster sits, because he's at a point where you would promote him, I think it's time. Now, the one argument that I would have when it comes to why you would keep him in the minor leagues is if you think you have to trade him at the deadline. But there was a report today by Andy Martino that I think, in my opinion, makes it even more likely or more of a good idea, I guess, based on the Mets strategy, how they're going to approach the deadline to promote Vientos now and see what they have. I'm going to talk about that report in just a minute. But first, I want to tell you about betonline.net, which is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news as BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, Major League Baseball, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So today, Andy Martino had a report for SNY. The article is titled, Mets looking to trade for DH and bullpen help will pay money, but not top prospects. First takeaway, love the DH and bullpen help. If anyone has been tuning in to Locked On Mets, you know, I don't think the Mets need to trade for a top-tier starter, and that's what Andy Martino is reporting, that the Mets are thinking along the same lines, that they are not willing to deal top prospects for a top starter, and also where they think that their roster needs to be addressed is at DH, which we're talking about today with Mark Vientos, and in the bullpen. You look at what they mentioned here. Martino says that the Mets are against moving Francisco Alvarez, Brett Beatty, or their few other high-end prospects in order to fill holes on the major league level. He talks about how what they would like to do is potentially trade lesser prospects and a Dom Smith or JD Davis, if possible, for late inning bullpen help, and they would take on an onerous contract for a veteran hitter. What he mentions here, he talks about taking on Patrick Corbin's contract to get Josh Bell. I would hate that, to be honest with you. Patrick Corbin, essentially, it would almost be like when the Dodgers took back David Price from the Red Sox in the Mookie Betts deal. You're just taking some bad money, and Corbin would just be, this guy at the end of the Mets bullpen who would get thrown out there in games where it was out of hand, right? He'd be like your garbage time mop up duty pitcher that he would maybe come in the starting rotation when you needed a guy. I mean, Corbin's not a great starting pitcher, and you'd be stuck with him for a couple of years after this. He makes $35 million, not next season, the following season. I'd hate that trade. But that's one of the options. So I think we can explore other deals. Charlie Blackmon, he mentions in here as well. Mike Moustakas, Eric Hosmer, but he talks about both of them trailed off lately. I don't know if I like any of those names really when it comes to a DH, and that's why I go back to Mark Vientos. If you're talking about taking on an awful contract just to get someone that's better than JD Davis, here you go. You have a month-long audition for Mark Vientos to come up and see what you have. And if you're not going to trade your high-end prospects, that means that if Mark Vientos would be off the table at the deadline anyway, then what's the incentive to keep him in AAA other than if you really think he needs more development? I think the bat's MLB ready. You have a need at DH. To me, put two and two together and make it happen, because the alternative is running JD Davis and Dom Smith back out there for another month, and I just think that's hurting you right now, and it would be good to get that jolt. This team could use a little bit of a jolt. Obviously, Max Scherzer coming back is going to be the biggest possible jolt, and he threw 80 pitches in his rehab start, said he's ready to go. Imagine we see him on Monday, so that's going to be great, but I'd like to see Mark Vientos slide right into that everyday role and give him some leash here to start every day. Let him play, let him go out there, and obviously, maybe if you want to get Pete off of his feet for a game, you can flip the two and throw Vientos out there at first base if you really want to. I think he can handle that position, but I would primarily make him a DH, get him up and see what he can do, because the idea of stashing him till the deadline, if you're not going to trade him, then play him right now. If the idea is you're going to trade him, then maybe that is the strategy. Maybe that's why they'll sit on this, because obviously he'll rebuild his value, or he'll not rebuild, he'll continue to build his value as a top prospect by feasting on AAA pitching. But I think he could be the answer. And if there's even a chance he's the answer, you better find out before the deadline, because that's when you'll know what you have to do. So if you get to a point where Vientos doesn't hit and you got to take on Patrick Corbin's contract to get a Josh Bell, well, then you swallow that poison pill, because it's a Steve Cohen-owned franchise, and he just can. So he'll pay a huge bill to give you the pieces you need, and I do love that. Okay, that is a really interesting strategy, and that is what the Mets should be doing if you have an owner that's willing to spend like that. It's the way that you can win and really get a huge competitive advantage over every other team in baseball, because outside of maybe the Dodgers, there's not a single team in baseball that would even fathom the idea of swallowing Patrick Corbin's contract to get a bat that they need. But the Mets could be that team. Now, in just a minute, after a word from our sponsors, I will talk about the upcoming series against the Texas Rangers, give you a little preview of what lies ahead. All right, a couple of news items before we dive into this series preview. Pete Alonso and Starling Marte move on to phase 2 of the All-Star Game voting. I'm a little confused, because I was under the impression that once you get into phase 2, the players vote on who's a finalist, but SNY said it goes to another fan vote. So I'll be honest, not exactly sure how that actually does get decided. But what I do know is Pete Alonso is a finalist with Paul Goldschmidt, which means he won't start, because he shouldn't, because Goldschmidt right now is probably the front runner for MVP. And then you got Starling Marte, who's one of the final 6 who could potentially start as one of the three outfielders. I think he's got a shot at it. So we'll see if Starling Marte can get voted in. If fans can keep voting, which I guess is maybe the case, then keep on voting for Starling Marte. He could be the one all-star starter for this Mets team. I already mentioned Max Scherzer through the 80 pitches and appears ready to rejoin the rotation. Jacob deGrom will make a rehab start tentatively scheduled for Sunday in Port St. Lucie. Could have to make about 3, 4, who knows, even 5 rehab starts before he gets back. I imagine they take this very slowly, and there's no reason to rush this. The perfect time to start Jacob deGrom is on the other side of the All-Star break. I think they can really be patient here, unless he just looks so great and is kind of forcing their hand. Take it easy. Make sure you get him 100%. The biggest goal right now for the Mets is to make sure they have Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom healthy for the second half, because that's better than anything they're going to get at the deadline or any promotion they could make. Those two horses atop the rotation is going to make this team scary good. Now, this weekend, they will be playing the Texas Rangers. Texas is 2 games under 500 on the season. They started the year 7-14 in April, had a great May, went 17-10, and have been about a 500 team this month. They're 2 games under on the month, 12-14, and 5-5 in their last 10. You look at their starting lineup. They have 4 hitters with an OPS over 700. Now, for context, the Mets have 7 hitters with an OPS over 700. We're talking about, a pretty sizable sample size to get to those 7 hitters. As far as you got Pete Alonso at the top of my head, Lindor, Mark Canha, Louis Guillorme, Jeff McNeil, Brandon Nimmo, and Starling Marte. I think that's the 7. You look at the 4 for the Rangers, you got Adolis Garcia has been their best hitter this year, 787 OPS, 15 home runs. Corey Seager, 726 OPS, 15 home runs. Decent, but certainly not what they're paying him. He should be a little better than that, honestly. Marcus Semien, very rough season. He is sub 700, 653 OPS, 8 home runs after having 45 homers in a contract year last year. They gave a combined $500 million to Seager. That's the combination there, to Seager and Semien this offseason. Not looking like money well spent at this point. The other 2 guys who have an OPS over 700, you have catcher Jonah Heim at 771 with 10 homers, and Nathaniel Lau at 767 with 10 homers. This isn't a great team, though. And you got some barbecue chicken on Friday night with Glenn Otto taking the mound versus Chris Bassett. Otto, a 5.31 ERA in 9 starts this year, a 1.51 whip. This is the type of guy the Mets can knock out in 4 innings. I expect them to win this game, honestly. You got Bassett on the hill. You're facing the guy who's a right-hander that the Mets should have no problem with. I feel like they're going to do a good job getting this series off and ending that 3-game skid they're on right now. Game 2, Martin Perez versus David Peterson. Perez having an unbelievable season. He's probably their all-star. 2.22 ERA. You got Peterson at 3.10. These are a couple of left-handed starters. The Mets have been faring much better against lefties recently than they did early in the year, but this is a really tough lefty. He's got a good mix with his sinker, his changeup, his cutter. Does a really good job getting ground balls, so not the easiest pitcher to go up against. Would be nice to have Mark Vientos in the lineup, wouldn't it? Right on left matchup for him. Maybe he can surprise you. Don't know if we'll see that, but man, it would be great. And also, the timing would be fantastic considering what today's podcast has been about. Final game of the series, John Gray versus Carlos Carrasco. Gray has a 3.89 ERA. We know how much Carlos Carrasco is struggling. You're really getting the 2 starters I think the Rangers like the most right now in Perez and Gray, but it doesn't make them starters the Mets should necessarily fear. Certainly not John Gray. They've seen him before when he was in Colorado. I think the Mets should have not too much difficulty here with this Rangers team. I think they can win this series. Carlos Carrasco is the big question mark, though. Just don't know what's going on with him. Is there more to that back injury? Is that why he struggled? We talk about Taijuan Walker and his great season so far. Carlos Carrasco is on the bubble, and I can't believe I'm saying that. I wouldn't have said that 2 weeks ago. He was for a long portion of this season the Mets' most consistent starter. Now that's been Taijuan Walker. Bassett's not getting bumped from the rotation. And right now, obviously, Walker's not. When you get to deGrom and Scherzer back, that's your 4. And David Peterson's throwing the ball really well. I imagine Carrasco will continue due to seniority, get those nods, but there's also an option to consider that vest, I think, based on innings pitch. So let me actually look that up really quick because that is an interesting wrinkle that we could think about here. Carlos Carrasco this season's making 12. Next year's got a vesting option for $14 million. Now that option vests if he is healthy and throws 170 innings this season. I don't know if the Mets would really manipulate things when you have Steve Cohen. I don't think that is something that they would really do because honestly, even if Carlos Carrasco doesn't have the best year, $14 million is nothing crazy for Cohen to pick up next season. But he's got a 4.85 ERA. He's at 81 and 2/3 at this point. So you got about 90 innings to play with. I don't know. It's an interesting discussion to have. I would also note that we could potentially see a little mid-season respite for Carlos Carrasco. I could see that as well. I could see Carrasco ending up on the IL when Jacob deGrom comes back, assuming that everything else goes great. And if Carrasco is still struggling, but I could potentially see at some point this season Carrasco getting shut down for a little bit, not necessarily to manipulate his innings, but maybe to get him back to 100% again. Something just tells me that he's not right because when he was right this season, he was just so much better than he's been, particularly over his last 4 starts. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets this week on Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen today. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects, hosted by Lindsey Crosby, our prospect encyclopedia. You can learn more about the stars of tomorrow, like a Mark Vientos, by checking out Locked On MLB Prospects wherever you get podcasts.